Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our very special presentation today. My name is Lisa Mansfield, and I'm the AICCM SIG and Event Coordinator. And I'd like to welcome you to our fantastic event with Debra Hess Norris, presented by the AICCM Book and Paper SIG. Before we begin, let's pause to reflect on the fact that today we meet online across Aboriginal land, sea and waterways, the custodial land of the oldest living civilization in the world. I and the AICCM acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of the country on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Australia, and the Lenape people of the Algonquin Nation in Delaware, USA. We recognise and celebrate their enduring connections to country, knowledge and culture, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And we respectfully acknowledge all First Nations people, their elders and their ancestors across the unceded lands and waters that our content reaches. So we're thrilled to have the Book and Paper SIG here today with Annalise Treacy, Jen Todd and Caitlin Knight, who will be running this presentation with our special guest, Debra Hess Norris. And now I'll hand you over to Jen Todd. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And welcome again to AICCM's webinar on photography with our very special guest, Debra Hess Norris today. My name is Jen and I'm joining you from Ngunnawal Country in Canberra, and I'm one of the current co-conveners of the AICCM Book and Paper Special Interest Group alongside Annalise and Caitlin. This is our second Book and Paper SIG webinar event, and we'd like to thank you all so much for joining us from so many different spots around Australia and around the globe. For anyone joining us today who is unfamiliar with the AICCM, otherwise known as the Australian Institute for the Conservation of Cultural Materials, it is the professional organisation for conservators in Australia. Some of the benefits of AICCM membership include access to their newsletters, online job listings, directories and online database, as well as discounted rates for conferences and workshops. It also includes access to AICCM's online publications, including the Bulletin, the National E-News and SIG publications. We also have an AICCM Facebook page and AICCM SIG Facebook groups, including our own AICCM Book and Paper SIG group, where we like to share useful tips, tricks and resources. And we would very much welcome discussion and engagement from anyone who would be interested in joining and getting involved. I will pop the link to the Book and Paper SIG group in the chat. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Caitlin, who's going to be running through the housekeeping for today's webinar.
Hi, so thanks everyone for tuning in today, especially to everyone who's come in on a Saturday to attend this event. We would really love to hear from you, and Debra will be answering all your questions at the end of the presentation. So if you want to pop them in the Q&A during the presentation when they come into your mind, and we will read them out to her at the end and maybe have a bit of a discussion. We would also really love you to say where you're dialing in from so that we can say hi to you. And I just thought I'd also let you know that we have had some unexpected weather where Debra is. So if there is any interruptions, just be aware that that could happen, and we'll get back online as soon as we possibly can. And also lastly, this event will be recorded and we will be sharing it on the AICCM website as soon as we can. So if you miss anything today or want to come back to it, you'll be able to do that. So I will hand over to Annalise now, who will get us started.
Hello everyone, Annalise here, dialing in from Gadigal land. I welcome you to this talk. We are absolutely thrilled to have Debra Hess Norris speaking to us today from Newark amidst very heavy winds there, I believe. So we really are so grateful to you, Deb, for joining us today. Now, I know everyone already knows about Deb, but I still have to run through some of her amazing achievements during her career and the reasons why we're here to hear her today. Deb Hess Norris is currently the chair and professor of the Art Conservation Department at the University of Delaware. She has been directing the undergrad program at Winterthur for almost 25 years. She's authored 45 articles and book book chapters and co-edited editions in the conservation of photographs. She has taught more than 140 workshops for conservators and professionals and lectured worldwide. And while doing that, she's raised over $20 million for art conservation initiatives worldwide. She was chair of the Heritage Preservation for 5 years between 2003 and 2008. She was president of the AIC between 1993 and 1997. She's co-led Middle East photograph preservation initiatives with many partners and trained over 80 professionals across the Arab world. And today she serves on the board for the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Library Alliance, the Conservation Centre for Art and Historic Artifacts, the Metropolitan Museum of Art Department of Photographs Visiting Committee, the Foundation of the AIC, and as a UD trustee. She has received the AIC Awards for Distinguished Achievement in Conservation, for Excellence in Teaching, and Distinction in Scholarship and Conservation. In 2018, she was awarded the Francis Allison Award, which is UD's highest facilities honour. Really, do I need to say any more? Deb is an amazingly inspiring speaker, and if you want to drive a passion for photography and the love of caring for photographic material, you need to hear Deb. She's a wonderful speaker, very inspiring and very motivating. So Deb, handing over to you.
Okay, great. Oh my goodness. Thank you. That was such a nice introduction. Thank you all for hosting me. It's a real honor and a pleasure. I have had the opportunity to teach in many places of the world, but I've taught twice in Australia and loved both of my visits. It was just wonderful. So I am going to share my screen, we hope, and get started. So let's see. I'm going to start my timer. How's that? Someone tell me, one of you tell me that you can see that.
Perfect. Yes, we can see that, Deb.
Okay, great. You know, it's so funny, you guys. We've all done Zoom a million times, but you're still always worried, you know, can anyone see your screen and what's happening? So I am honored to have a chance to speak to all of you, and I can imagine at least an auditorium. And it's fun in the chat to see so many colleagues. Thank you so much for attending, and especially those in Australia on a Saturday morning. You deserve a special medal. I've sort of taken a number of different talks and added to them. You might wonder about this title, but some of the slides that I'm sharing with you are slides that I shared with our first year fellows in our graduate program on their very first day when they started in August. And at that time, I was 64. Now I'm 65. My birthday's in October. And many of you probably know I'm a huge Beatles fan, like almost a sickness. And so I thought this was like the best title when I'm 64, Lessons Learned from Me to You. And so I kept it. I did have a chance to do a TEDx talk a number of years ago. I think it took years off my life, but it was a great honor. And when it was over, it was a lot of fun too. So sharing lessons learned and dreams across the universe. This is me actually. In the 5th grade. I loved the Beatles then, and unfortunately, I've never grown out of it. The program that you see there is actually one from 1966, August 16th, 1966, when I saw the Beatles with my father. And it's something that I still treasure today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about outreach, advocacy, engagement, communication, fundraising. I'm happy to answer questions along those lines. And in doing so, before I start, although we've already had one land acknowledgement, I too would like to acknowledge the Lenni Lenape peoples who reside in the areas that you see here, including Northern Delaware. I'm now in my dining room in my home in Northern Delaware, and the University of Delaware and Winterthur Museum are both located there as well. And so I acknowledge them and recognize that I sit on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape peoples, and we acknowledge them, pay tribute to their past, present, and future elders. We've had the great privilege to work with some of the tribal community in our conservation program and feel very honored to do so. As I speak to all of you, I'd like to try and channel the best I can our faculty, staff, students, and alums, and their creativity, their compassion, their connections, and their collaborations. And I believe that this is something that really connects conservation in such powerful ways. And also, I am forever guided by the wisdom and kindness, the humility, of these two individuals who I carry on my shoulder and think about every single day, who look down from us from the heavens, Dr. Vicki Kessman and Bruno Pouliot, whose humanity knew no bounds, and they were constantly and focused on our students and their success. And I thank them from the bottom of my heart. In talking and thinking about our graduate program, well, I'm going to talk really about advocacy, fundraising, and communications, and those kinds of things. But I think it's important just to share with you. So I direct the master's level program jointly sponsored between Winterthur and the University of Delaware. It's a 3-year program. We take 10 students a year. Actually, today we finished the admissions process for the class of 2024. And we had 66 applicants. We interviewed 27. Every one of them was absolutely fantastic. The future of our field is very bright. These individuals are so passionate, so committed to the preservation of cultural heritage and to finding those connections and between our work and societal challenges, which is so important today. So what you're seeing here is sort of our goals, what our goals are in our graduate program, our Department of Art Conservation as well. I chair the department, which includes not just our master's level program, but also a PhD in preservation studies and an undergraduate program in art conservation. But here you can sort of see what we're focused on all the time, and all these goals are always interrelated. How do we promote student success, advanced faculty scholarship? I believe strongly that the strength of educational programs in general and all disciplines is really centered on the faculty and the work that they're doing, their ability to connect with the students, to foster research and excitement. Fostering a connected local and global community, securing external support is always a big part of all of our goals. But everything is connected, of course, through strengthening diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, which I know we all believe in with all our heart and soul. And so I also channel, as I speak to you, our students, and this is our first year class with 2 other guests. I taught the photograph conservation block in January of this year for, I think, maybe the 36th time. I still love teaching this block and working with our students, but this was the first time I had to do it online. And I tell you, I was terrified. We did a hybrid. Thankfully, it wasn't entirely online, but it worked out really well, thanks to the resilience and the commitment of the students that you see here, including a guest from Mexico and one of our undergraduates as well. And, you know, trying to ensure that as we learn, as we focus our attention to photography, we're also constantly connecting to each other. So photographic collections and their preservation needs are universal around the world, as we're all aware. And we are so fortunate really to be surrounded by these materials that are varied in such significant ways. These images are just examples of different photographic processes. The image to the far left of the screen is really interesting in that this is a sepia-toned silver gelatin postcard, but the colors on the dress are actually gelatin. So they have a 3-dimensional effect. So it's really quite beautiful. All these images are in relatively good condition, a collodion print in the middle, a glossy collodion, and a matte collodion at the right. But as we know about photography, I mean, these images are powerful, and many of them are comprised of metallic silver particles that scatter light based on the light sensitivity of silver halide, silver iodide, silver bromide, or silver chloride. And they can vary in significant ways, from developing out images, as you see on the left, to printing out images on the right. But images and photography is, again, because of its varied structure, some of them are based on the light sensitivity of iron salts, including the cyanotype on the left or the platinum print on the right. And all this is information I think that many of you are well aware of, but it's just great to see some of these beautiful images too. Many photographs have been gold toned to improve their permanence, hand colored to make them appear more lifelike. And in most cases, certainly not in all, but in many cases, these final image materials are embedded in a transparent binder support of some kind, whether it's collodion, as you see in the amber type, with the hand-colored cheeks on the left, or silver gelatin developing out photograph, admittedly faded to some extent on the right. In this case, gelatin is the binder. And of course, albumin is the binder that dominates the world in the 19th century. This is certainly true in Australia from, I don't know the exact dates for Australia, honestly, but it's a process that dominated the world in the 19th century. And these materials, whatever binder layers we're dealing with, whatever final image materials, are coated on a variety of metals, paper, glass, or flexible film, from cellulose acetate to cellulose nitrate to polyester. It's funny, as we met with the candidates this week, and they would talk about their love of composite materials, I was constantly wanting to say, you should go into photography. Photography has it all. I mean, you have all these materials and such amazing images too. So I think we all recognize the power and magic of photography to really connect the world in powerful ways. And as we study photography, we strengthen our ID skills. We begin to learn about these different materials, how to recognize them, how they deteriorate. And it's so important, of course, when we're dealing with the preservation of these materials, to understand how they interact and what we can do to preserve them. And thankfully, the field has developed so many important tools and resources for aiding in this study, such as a graphics atlas from the Image Permanence Institute. And there's many examples of this around the world. And here's a slide that I just love, because it just gives me such pleasure to see all these wonderful publications that have emerged in the last 10 or so, maybe 15 years, centered on the preservation of photographic materials. And all these have emerged because individuals have worked together to strengthen our knowledge, to invest in this field, and to share their research more broadly. We often think about timelines when we think about photographic materials. This is more of a traditional one, all the different photographic print processes, from the early salted paper print to digital materials. Some of my favorite guys are seen here, my two grandsons, Matteo and William, in digital format here at the top. And then of course, Sir Paul McCartney. I think many of you know, I've already said it probably 7 times, that I'm in love with the Beatles, but I'm also in love with those grandsons. But more importantly, also, a big happening for us, our family, is in February. We had 2 new granddaughters born within 5 days of each other. And they're seen here, Isabella and Elizabeth Grace, Isabella Juliet. They're just absolutely amazing. All documented in digital formats. And it'll be up to all of us to ensure that these images are preserved for future generations. These images, those of, in my case, those of our grandchildren, those of my family, enrich our heart and souls, and they are so powerful in terms of being treasured and connecting us from Benin in Africa to these are photographs from Iran, and this is actually me and my parents and our dog Dixie from Cleveland, Ohio, before the birth of my brother and sister. They're in really good condition, and it's important to constantly think about why are they important? Why do we preserve them? And here are just some things that we can all come up with, certainly with a relatively short period of time. The value of these objects and their significance. And the reason this becomes so important is that as we are fundraising, as we're thinking about why should we invest in the preservation of cultural heritage and the preservation, in this case, of photographic materials, it's important that we can state why. Why are they valuable? Are they enhancing tradition, documenting history, fostering dialogue, enriching memory, celebrating greatness, whatever that might be? And being able to characterize that is important. So I'm going to stop for 1 minute and just ask one of you if you can verify that my audio is still working, because I'm getting a message.
Yes, your audio is still working fine, Deb. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Annalise. So in thinking about these materials and thinking about their context and thinking about why they're important, why do we value them, wherever they might be. And of course, my remarks are focused on photographic materials, but I hope you can take them and think about the disciplines that you are really focused on, that you're really connected to. When you're starting to think about raising money, you need to be thinking about many of the issues that are centered here. What is the project? What are you trying to achieve? What is its scope? Why is it important? And this gets to, why are those images important? Why must they be preserved for future generations? What is the value that they bring to society, to the region, to the planet, depending on what that collection is? And of course, also I've learned in writing so many grant proposals in my life, and I do love fundraising, but it's also important to really articulate what are these projects going to cost, and to prepare a very detailed and what I'm describing as a transparent budget. Transparent meaning You want to be sure that individuals look at those numbers and understand where they come from and believe that they're investing in a project that's important to them, that's going to advance our knowledge, that's going to strengthen society, but that also is reasonable in its cost. How long will it last? What is the timeline? How does your project connect to the goals of the funders? And this is going to vary. This is not a fundraising talk. I'd be happy to do that at another time if that would be useful. This is really not that. But it is important to always think about, where are you raising the money from? If you're dealing with corporate donors they're philanthropic for sure. They want to help, they want to be engaged, but they're also focused on marketing and building audience and building connections. And so you need to be thinking about that, whereas foundations may be more focused on their mission, on education, on outreach. And so constantly thinking about what the goals of the funder are, and individual donors have very different goals. And connecting your project in a successful way to their goals is important. You need to be thinking about, how do you determine if your project is successful? How do you measure success? That is very challenging sometimes in conservation, I've found. And because sometimes our activities aren't so measurable, but we need to be able to document what is success and how are we going to determine that. And finally, the short and long-term impact of the work that we're going to do. What do we anticipate will happen in the short term, and what are the future opportunities? So thinking about these and putting everything into context is important. And why are we constantly writing grants around the preservation of our photographic heritage? Because these materials are threatened. They are fragile. They are easily deteriorated through oxidation and reduction through exposure to high temperature and relative humidity, light, pollutants. These fragile images, often, as we said earlier, comprised of metallic silver, are prone to deterioration in ways that I think many of us have seen in our own collections, no matter where we're working. They may fade, stain, corrode, crack, deteriorate in the ways that cultural heritage does more generally. And so their preservation becomes incredibly important, and often incredibly urgent as well. So there is a sense of urgency in the work that we do, but one thing I would say in terms of fundraising is you have to be really careful. You can talk about the urgency, but be sure you have a solution, because I think, except for emergencies, natural emergencies, catastrophes, and then people immediately give to a crisis in really powerful ways. It really brings out the best in people in so many ways. But for the most part, funders are not necessarily going to give to a crisis unless they believe that there's a real solution. And so as you develop the sense of urgency in your thinking, be sure that you're constantly thinking about, what is the solution? How am I going to address this challenge? These challenges are always with us, and preventive conservation, of course, is essential and becoming all the more important in all the work that we do around the world. And again, in the field of photograph conservation, we are so fortunate to have a whole body of work, some of it captured in the earlier slides with the books and publications, conferences, webinars. The work that Photon has done in Australia is absolutely fabulous. Groups like that around the world that began to provide us with concrete data that we can use to begin to estimate how things will deteriorate and what needs to be done to preserve them. Work such as that from the National Archives, in the United States, from the Image Permanence Institute in Rochester, New York, from the Canadian Conservation Institute, from the Center for Research in Paris. There's so many organizations that are doing really important work that help to guide our thinking and help to center solutions for us. In our program, we've been working with many different groups, really around the world, but nationally, we've been working closely with historically Black colleges and universities in an effort to work with them to preserve the rich photographic collections that we find in their libraries and archives, and also to work with their students in an effort to inspire them, to introduce them to the field of art conservation, and to mentor them through the process of applying to graduate school or entering the cultural heritage sector in one way or another. So this has been a long and productive and really incredibly rewarding relationship that we've had, and we continue to build on that and develop different programs. Now we're offering, in collaboration with the HBCU Library Alliance, Historically Black Colleges and Universities, a series of summer internships and training programs working with other research libraries across the United States. So we're constantly thinking about projects and what they are, and doing this always in partnership with others, and then how to fund them and how to support them, and how to articulate why they're important. And in this case, these projects are incredibly important for so many reasons, from diversity and inclusion to access, to eliminating barriers to graduate education, and to the preservation of these absolutely enormous and incredibly important photographic collections that that inspire us all and that educate us as well. So here are just some lessons learned in I've got to move my thing. In conservation, I have a few slides like this, and you know, I think you all are probably aware of this, but it's so important that we don't work in isolation, that we work together around the world, that we're not insular, that we constantly promote respect. And that in developing these projects, that we're establishing long and short-term goals. And I guess I would urge you never to be intimidated, never to think that something's not possible, that there's no money. That's the worst thing that you can do. If you have a good project, I believe you can always find the resources to do it. You develop partnerships and collaborations, and these things can be done. But you have to build visibility. You have to communicate effectively and often. You have to acknowledge and celebrate the work of others. And you do have to take risks. And there are many projects that I've been involved in over my life where I suppose I was taking a risk, but believed in it. And it's often worked out, but only because I've been working in partnership with others, and that we all believed together that these projects were important. The communication piece, of course, is so clear to all of us. And I think it's so exciting to see what our field of conservation around the world is doing, and how we're enhancing and enriching our communication using social media and all different kinds of resources. And I'm so grateful to our emerging conservation professionals and recent graduates for the work that they're doing. They're really leading the way around the world in communication using social media or traditional media. Communicating the relevance is so important. Again, why is this work important? How does it connect to societal challenges? Establishing urgency, but also sharing solutions, and always engaging the community. And if we continue to promote our work in powerful ways, we will open up opportunities for preservation, for building new partnerships, and working together. We have to, of course, always share stories as they're happening now. And sometimes this is a challenge because you're so busy that it's really hard to get ahead of the communication part too. But we have to recognize that particularly true with traditional and social media as well. People want to hear about what's happening now, not what happened yesterday. Okay, of course, I love this slide. Mateo, my grandson, who's in first grade, by the way, told me, he calls me Bibi, you need to take the slide out. Nobody's going to care about this. And don't I know, he says, that Paul McCartney has nothing to do with photograph conservation. This is my grandson who's in first grade. Well, okay, he's right in that case, but I put him in there anyway. And but to make that message again, that that we need to communicate, and we need to communicate in a timely way. But I do believe we're doing so well in this regard. It was so great this week to interview these 27 candidates and to hear about the work that they're doing, not just in the examination, documentation, treatment, analysis, and preventive care of cultural heritage of all kinds, but more importantly, also what they're doing with advocacy, outreach, engaging communities, focused on diversity, inclusion, access, and equity, and all these other projects as well. And so this is really great. For conservation students, I would urge you to constantly challenge yourself, but not too much. Find that balance, that life-work balance is so important. I probably haven't done so well in that regard, but you all can do much better than I have done. But you know, the most important thing, of course, is you find something you really love. And in my case, I feel like I've got the best job in the world, the best profession in the world, and I'm very grateful for that. So I don't worry as much about that balance, but everyone else should. Take advantage of the many resources that are shared with you as students, and the opportunities to always connect to those professionals who might be visiting either through a webinar or live. Don't ever think that you have too much to do, that you can't go to lunch or coffee or dinner or something with someone else, because those connections are going to be much more important than something you might be doing on your own. engage with communities, harness your knowledge, skills, and scholarship, and certainly share your passion. In the end, it's really about this passion that our conservation students around the world have, and that I think those of us who are involved in education and training feel so very privileged to benefit from. So in terms of other thoughts on just the preservation of global cultural heritage, and experiences that I've had working around the world, from Cuba to Benin in Africa. I love this slide that you see here from Benin. It was a workshop that a number of us organized in collaboration with a school in Benin for cultural heritage, focused on the preservation of photographic materials, engaging representatives from all over sub-Saharan Africa primarily. And what was so interesting about this workshop particularly is that in Africa, many of the greatest photographic collections are held by the families, are held by the son or the father who was a great photographer from one country or another. And so you really had to think critically and creatively about preservation strategies that would work in these situations where these great collections may still be housed in individual homes. This was really such a rewarding workshop, and many of us were involved in it. And the other important point to make in all this, the slide on the left is from Cuba and a workshop that we did with Apoyo online and the Cuban government. But with all the workshops that I've had the great privilege to be involved in, they're always centered on partnerships, with the primary partner being in that country. They lead the way, they guide the work that we do, and ensure that that our teaching is relevant. And the teaching is very collaborative too, always engaging all the participants, always listening to the challenges and the solutions, because they have the answers, and their excitement and their interest is inspiring. Collaboration is key to success, right? It's a key to success in life. And with these projects, what I found, again, these are just my thoughts, is that it's really important to define the problem first. Don't worry about the funding right away. Think about what it is you're trying to achieve. Focus on building relationships, who should be involved, who are the partners, and develop trust among all the partners and a strong communication plan. What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to communicate that? And then you can begin to start looking for funding to meet those goals. And you may start small, you may do a pilot, and that can work really well. And from the successes of that pilot, you build other opportunities. You develop an action agenda with responsibilities, who's responsible for what and when. And then you need to be certain that you can assess your progress, that you can really determine if something is successful or not, and what needs to change and not as well. I really believe in the pilot project approach as well. It's worked really well. I've had the great privilege to collaborate with the Arab Image Foundation. I have a slide coming up soon, I think, actually here. The Arab Image Foundation in Beirut, Lebanon, with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with the Getty Conservation Institute, with a number of many photograph conservators have been involved in this initiative over the last 15 years or so, which is really centered on building awareness about the preservation of photographic collections and our photographic heritage throughout the Arab world. A series of workshops and programs that have engaged many, many individuals in the preservation of these materials, but led by the Arab Image Foundation. This is such an inspiring organization. I urge all of you to check out the work that they're doing as they work to strengthen photographic production and creativity and preservation throughout the Arab world, with a wonderful collection as well. Unfortunately, as we all know, Beirut suffered a terrible tragedy last August 4th, with the explosion of in the port of Beirut. And what is really frightening is that here are pictures from the street outside of the Arab Image Foundation, an interior view of the offices of the Arab Image Foundation. The Arab Image Foundation is located 800 meters from this explosion site. And thank God, most of the staff was not working that day, and the staff member who was hurt, was injured, but has survived. But the disaster was catastrophic. They have a cold storage vault. And I think my next slide, yeah, here you can see on the left is the interior of the cold storage vault. So you can see that the boxes moved around, but only three, I believe only three objects were damaged. It's just amazing. The collection was in the cold storage vault, and it certainly protected them from this horrific explosion. You can follow the work that they're doing, to address the challenges that they face by subscribing to their newsletter, by contributing to their fundraising efforts to develop resources so that they eventually would like to move to another location. They want to do more public outreach. They have a great library. They have a fabulous collection. They're very strong in digitizing materials. They do a lot of training. They're a real training center for the entire Middle East. And it's just, I share this with you, not just to speak about their tragedy. They certainly have emerged from that in such powerful ways, but to speak to the power of these partnerships. Because once you connect to these organizations, they're in your heart forever. And we all worked hard to try and help raise money, to raise awareness, to address the disaster, which was particularly challenging during a pandemic as well. The preservation of photographic collections is so much, and the work that we do in general is so much about renewing hope and relevance. And in our work at the University of Delaware, and I know this is certainly true with my colleagues in Australia and probably everyone, so many of my colleagues who are on this call today, so many of us have been involved in responding to natural disasters and man-made disasters as well, from hurricanes and floods to tornadoes and tsunamis. And when those individuals go back to their homes, they're going back to find their photographs in so many cases, because that's what we're connected to. And so as photograph conservators, we become very involved in disaster response and recovery. And in our own program, during my photograph conservation block, for a number of years, we've taken on special projects so that our work is not just theoretical, focused on the examination, documentation, and treatment of photographic materials, but we try and take on projects as well, although it's only taught over a 3-week period, so we're limited in what we can do. But probably the most powerful project that I've been involved in my life is pictured here, and that was to help with the recovery of photographs from a horrific fire that happened on Christmas Day in 2015 in a town outside of Columbus, Ohio, where 3 young boys and their grandmother perished. And all that survived from this fire were these collection of 300 or so family photographs. And it was heartbreaking. Honestly, it still almost makes me cry to think about this work. But together, our students cleaned and stabilized these photographs and returned them to the parents of these 3 young boys. And it is the kind of work that we're focused on all the time. What can we do to help to recover the images that mean so much to individuals in whatever tragedy they've faced? And it gives us some sense that we can contribute in some small way to the challenges that so many are facing today. And all the more so with the pandemic, and thinking about what can we do in our field to contribute to well-being, to contribute to joy, to address the challenges that this world is facing, many of which are listed here: injustice, oppression, systemic racism, climate change. We know all of them, and we deal with them constantly, and we have to really think hard about how the work we do in photograph conservation, but certainly in all these other areas as well, connects to these challenges. And what can we do to create coalitions to silence guns? This is such a horrible problem in the United States right now, always has been, to engage communities, to stimulate development, to recapture knowledge, to help those that are marginalized, to combat racism, to lead an agenda that's centered on the value of cultural heritage. This is key to the work that we do in the preservation of cultural heritage more broadly, and it's also essential if we're working towards trying to raise funds and develop opportunities, because we must connect the work that we're doing to the UNESCO Sustainable Heritage Goals of 2030 and to the societal challenges, so that when foundations, government, corporations, individuals, associations are investing in our work, they're investing not just in the preservation of photographic collections, but in addressing these societal challenges. We must use our skills to address our goals, which you see here, which I talked about earlier, as well as these many challenges that the world faces as well. And I had developed the slide, and as I looked at it more and more, I thought, you know, it's just not quite right, because everything is connected. It sort of makes it look like we have all these disciplines out there. And this is always one of my fears in our field, honestly, that we become too siloed, we become too separated. And yet we all know that we learn from each other. And photographic materials, I mean, we wouldn't exist with all these other programs and disciplines. And I think it's true of all of us that we're constantly working together. When I look at our program, when I look at education and training, what are we trying to do? What are the skills and the competencies that we're trying to develop? Well, some of them are listed here. I don't need to read these to you. But everything from examination to public engagement to collaboration to ethical decision making. And then I have to think about what is the impact. That's often the more important part. Why are we doing what we're doing? And how are we going to continue to innovate, to help underserved collections, to enrich cultural understanding, to respond to emergencies, to advance and share our knowledge. And again, if you're thinking about where to find funds and how to create opportunities, it really is through the impacts. It's through addressing these challenges and demonstrating what we're doing through strong communication, through partnership, through advocacy, and through passion. Because our work clearly connects the arts, humanities, and the sciences. We often talk about our field being interdisciplinary. This is such a great thing when you're fundraising, because we cover all these areas in really powerful ways. And our work is important. It does matter. It's significant. And we have to constantly be able to articulate why. Why is the cultural heritage important? Why is the preservation of cultural heritage important? And this list could go on. And I think we need to just carry it in our heart and be able to speak to it. And why the work that we're doing in my case, again, my lecture is a little bit more focused on photographic materials, but of course this is true with everything. So final thoughts, really more, I guess, for our students. I think for others, you know, this is probably obvious, but yes, seizing opportunities. I would just urge all students, all emerging professionals to just say yes. Seize those opportunities that are given to you. Always listen. We all have to do a better job of that. Focus on solutions, working to make a difference, working together. Building these coalitions that are focused on trust and shared vision. And I urge people, when you're given an opportunity to get involved in AICCM and other organizations, to do it with excitement. But I think of my life and all the opportunities that I've had, they've all been generated by something that I may have agreed to do and sort of thought, oh my gosh, you know, should I do it? And I'm so grateful I did. I can't think of one thing that I agreed to that I've regretted. Because it's allowed me to meet new people, to do new things, to grow, to learn from others. And so I urge everyone to volunteer and to share your passion, to be flexible, forgiving, understanding, thankful, and to always reach out, of course, to your mentors. So working together, we are forever connected. And we're forever connected with memories, memories that are captured in powerful ways through photography. This, by the way, is my husband, Bob, and our daughters, Sarah to the left and Maggie to the right. We all graduated from the University of Delaware. We actually, this will be scary to you all, I think. We actually all went to the same high school too. And Bob and I were high school sweethearts. So many people just can't believe that. And we all still live in Delaware too. But anyway, the importance of memories, the importance of using these materials to connect people, to connect to society. And I share with you the thoughts of President Joe Biden. To heal, we must remember. Our work is so centered on memory. And here is a tribute to our other granddaughter who passed away, but who we think about all the time. She's on the moon. And, you know, we cherish her memory, and to heal, we must remember. And thank God for Joe Biden. I will tell you that as a resident of the state of Delaware, he actually spoke at our high school graduation. He was our senator for 36 years. And, you know, such a compassionate human being. And at that graduation, he spoke about how, you know, you need to find your life's work and your passion and live it. And I feel so grateful to him and so grateful to that opportunity to have discovered and to be involved in this field of conservation, the preservation of photographic materials, education and training, outreach, advocacy, communication, partnerships, and working with my wonderful colleagues around the world. And I just think that the statement to heal, we must remember, is so important to all of us and really connects so powerfully to the work that we do in the preservation of cultural heritage. So I'll end with this at 37 minutes. I wanted to be sure I finished in 40 minutes. And that is just a slide that I've shared with our students through this pandemic. We're all been facing challenges, certainly through the pandemic, and our students, perhaps most of all, as they have to reimagine their goals and think about their next steps. And trying to encourage all of them, and this will be true for the students in the audience today, to hold on to your goals and what your determination for an enriching professional and personal life, and do not ever let them go. Things have changed a bit in the pandemic, but there are so many individuals out there who want to work with you, who will help you to achieve those goals, and who believe in you. And so I'm going to end with that, if that's okay. I thank you all for your attention, and particularly those who are there on a Saturday, and 38 minutes. So I guess that was okay, but thank you all for your attention.
Debbie, that was absolutely wonderful. And I think that you raised a number of questions that, are quite prevalent. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was the importance of advocacy. I think in many training courses, we train in how to work at the bench. We train to conserve photographs, and it's all about the object and the conservator working together. But not all training courses really offer that training in how to be an advocate and how to engage with communities and how to represent the objects that you are trying to save. And I think even in a larger organization, even in a museum or a library or a gallery, you really do have to be an advocate to encourage more senior members of staff to put resourcing into particular projects that you feel are meaningful. Do you think, I don't know at the University of Delaware, but is advocacy part of the training there?
Well, it is part of the training. I mean, I can't say that we have lectures on advocacy, but we have our students give many public talks, professional and public talks. We do lots of tours and invite people into the labs so the students can share. I mean, they're fabulous at it. You may think you're not a great advocate, you need training. No, you don't. You just have to share your love and your passion for this field. That's all you have to do. And be confident in doing so. But even if you're not so confident, you will build your confidence as you do more, because people are so interested. And they can make those connections between what you're saying and what they've experienced. And so we don't have advocacy training, but we focus on that quite a bit. We have free of charge conservation clinics where people can bring their objects and students can talk to them. Again, public tours, public visits, blogs, and all kinds of things. But I do believe that, oh my goodness, our field is so good at that because of that passion. And really that's what you need. And telling stories, that's often, when you're talking about fundraising, it's you need data. You do need data. You need to be able to talk about demographics and this and that but you also need to tell stories. And that's advocacy as well, sharing those stories and those connections that you have to those objects that you've had a chance to work on. There have been so many times where I have guided tours, particularly funders, through the labs, and we'll start and they'll say something like, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited, but I only have 20 minutes. Okay. I say, okay, we'll go to one lab and, get you out in 20 minutes. And then it's like 19 minutes. And I say, oh, we better go. It's, oh, no, this is unbelievable. I just can't believe this field. I never knew about it. So, and those are the students again, and faculty, staff, everyone. I believe every participant on this call is a great advocate, because you're in this field, because you love those materials, you believe in this work, and that's what it requires, I think.
Deb, I've got our next question here. It's coming from Cheryl Jackson. It says,
hey, Cheryl.
Do you feel that the future of the photographic print is threatened in this digital age? No one is printing anything out anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm so grateful to Cheryl. She hosted our workshops and has done such amazing things in photograph conservation for Australia. Oh gosh, I don't know. I think the future of photography, it's hard to know. I mean, certainly it's digital, but the actual photographic print as it exists will always be treasured, I believe, for its materiality, for, you know, it's so different from a digital file. And we will continue to preserve those materials. And so that I'm not worried about. I think just the field and what is a photograph is changing for sure, but that's just part of, you know, moving forward. But the actual preservation of the materials that I shared will continue, I believe, under the leadership of individuals in Australia like Cheryl and so many others around the world. You know, I wish some of the participants could come on and answer these questions too. If I was in front of you all, I'd call on many of you guys to answer these questions.
I've got another question here, wondering about your views of photographic heritage and wondering why photography and cameras are often conserved separately, cameras by object conservators and photos by a photograph conservator, and what your kind of thoughts were on that, and possibly if you could share your definition of photographic heritage with us.
Oh gosh. I don't know if I can how to define photographic heritage. Let me answer the question about cameras and photographs. I think I think the main reason why different individuals may be conserving these different materials is that they are very different. You know, a camera is often much more three-dimensional and structural. Like I, for one, wouldn't feel informed enough to preserve a camera and its working properties and might work with an objects conservator, but I would have no hesitation bringing a camera to a photograph conservator who has those skills and that knowledge. So I think, first of all, there aren't that many individuals in the world who are working on cameras, honestly. Cameras are certainly collected by some institutions. They're so important. We need to do a better job of preserving them. And perhaps they're, because of their mechanical nature, because of their composites, because they're often comprised of metal and leather and glass, they're more often, when they are preserved, treated by an objects person. But I don't think there's ever a sense, it sort of harkens back to when photograph conservation first started. When I was involved, it was a relatively new field, and many of the individuals who were working on photographs were paper conservators and paintings conservators, and all sort of trying to sort out their way. And with cameras, the preservation of cameras there's just not that many people doing it. But I don't think it's controversial. I just think it's really people working in the areas where they feel comfortable, where they feel they have the skills and knowledge to do so. I don't know how do I define photograph conservation? It's such a good question, and one I should be able to do. I mean, in my mind, it's focused on the examination, documentation, treatment, analysis, and preventive care of our photographic heritage, from the earliest materials to digital materials as well. It is very centered on preventive conservation. It is perhaps also very centered on advocacy, education, and training, because of the nature of photographic collections, because there's so many of them and they're so large and diverse. And because of the vulnerability of these materials, particularly when you're looking at cellulose nitrate and cellulose acetate film-based materials that are inherently unstable and require immediate attention when you're dealing with color photographs and organic dyes that fade in the light and the dark. When you're dealing with early 19th century materials with photolytic silver images that are particularly prone to fading and oxidation. But I would be incorrect in painting a picture that, photographs are suffering more than other materials. All cultural heritage has its challenges. I'm just more familiar with and have lived more with photographic materials. I will say that there's an urgent need still for photograph conservators around the world, and it's just to put a plug in for this particular discipline. There's so many opportunities, and of course you find photographs everywhere, right? From libraries and archives to museums to private homes to archaeological repositories and everything in between. And I think that the very best in this field is when we're working together and not so worried about whose objects and whose photographs and whose paper and whose book and whose paintings. That's where I become worried. I think it's great for us to have all these different groups, and we all do so well, and we all learn from each other in that way, but always coming together to share that knowledge is so important, and far beyond conservation too.
Our next question that's coming is from Detlef.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. He says, "Hi Debbie, as you know, there is a powerful trend towards digitizing cultural heritage collections. This is at times at the expense of the usual care and treatment of the original photograph/object. There is also a belief that once a photograph has been digitized, that the original could be disposed of. How would you give a counter argument to this view?"
Yeah, well, first of all, hi Detlef. Boy, I miss not seeing you. And he was one of the organizers for my very first visit to Australia, which was so memorable. And I mean, I could tell you guys so many funny stories. That's not what Detlef wants. But I will say that I and Nora Kennedy, both of us, were so totally taken by kangaroos. We couldn't get enough of them. And this would drive Detlef crazy. You know, before 4 o'clock and we were teaching, we said, we've got to go out and see. It's like, are you kidding? But for us, it was like the most magical thing. Anyway, his question and the counter argument, I think you have to focus on, yes, digitization is fabulous for scholarship, for making collections available, for enhancing knowledge and all of that. It's so important, and building awareness. But those digital files are just not the same as the original materials. Looking at an albumin print will never represent a digital image. I mean, a good example actually is during admissions this week when we were interviewing our students. It was all online. One part of our admissions process is that we have a whole file of objects. It used to be live. They would look at an object and talk a little bit about it. What is it? How's it deteriorated? That kind of thing, just to get a sense of their thinking. This year, there was a daguerreotype. We had images of it and whatnot, but it wasn't the same. And you know, the student trying to sort of talk about this object as a digital image was nothing like that daguerreotype. And I think, and Detlef, you of course could do this far better than I, but it's a matter in this case of putting those objects out and communicating. You know, look at the difference, and this will never be captured and achieved with a digital copy. I think those are conversations, and that's where we need to rely on the objects themselves to tell the stories.
Thanks for that. So our next question comes from Lisa. Could you talk more about the diversity programs you've developed to help limit barriers to graduate education? Are these led and funded by the university? She would also love maybe some tips on starting that kind of program and what kind of roles partnering institutions have played and could play in the future.
So I'll talk a little bit about it. I'd also be happy, you know, for a more extended conversation if she wants to email me and we could do a Zoom chat. We have a number of different initiatives. We need more, for sure. But one, I'll talk about our programming with the HBCU Library Alliance. So it's Historically Black Colleges and Universities Library Alliance. Again, there are about 103 HBCUs in the United States, and they all have libraries and archives. So this program first really started with the collections and started with the need to think about how to preserve the photographic collections held in these libraries and archives. And it was a collaboration with the HBCU Library Alliance, you know, leading the way. That's what's really important and driving the discussions and reaching out to the University of Delaware in this case, but to other partners as well, including a regional center in Philadelphia, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifact, the Image Permanence Institute. There were a number of partners. So the first part in developing this project was to establish the partners and then to look for funding. This project has been funded in many different ways, including the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, and the University of Delaware. The University of Delaware has funded a fair amount of this work. because they also believe in how important it is. And I think with diversity and inclusion, we can't just talk about it, we have to invest in it. You know, we can't just say we need to do this, but there's no money. And so the University of Delaware has invested as well, and as have individual donors, some of our alums. And there's a number of different projects, so it's a little bit hard to talk about here, but one in particular is a training program where the HBCUs nominate, actually students apply from these schools for what was originally on-site, now is virtual because of the pandemic, but a summer internship program where one student is paired with a research library with a conservation staff, and that student then works within that library on projects, and then returns to their HBCU, and there's some funding that's allocated to the HBCU through this grant to help develop a preservation project there. So the student then can take their knowledge that they gained that summer working with these great conservators and mentors and apply it to their institution. And in that way, we feel that we are empowering students to share their knowledge, but also simultaneously preserving parts of the collections in these universities and colleges. So that was one model which had to be sort of flipped on its side. This is orchestrated also by Melissa Tadone at Winterthur Museum. She's one of the leads on this initiative. And but with the pandemic, of course, we had to rethink all this. So suddenly the training became virtual, online. We're all dealing with that. It's amazing, really, what you can do online. And so now we bring the students together in an online format, involving those research universities as well and those partners, but through online learning and teaching. That's just one. We have another project with the Alliance for HBCU Museums and Galleries and other initiatives as well, and I'd be happy to talk more about them. In terms of funding, you know, I think that, like is true with all fundraising, you develop partners, you figure out why it's important. You look for funders who, you develop projects, not funders, you develop projects, think about why it's important, what are you trying to achieve, what are your short and long-term goals, why are they relevant, and then seek funders who share those goals. And you know, don't overpromise what you're going to deliver. But in this case, of course, our goals were twofold: to help to preserve the collections in these libraries and archives, and most importantly, to inspire this next generation of potential conservators to pursue our field, to become engaged in our profession, or in allied professions as well. But I'd be happy, you know, if there's more interest in that, to meet by Zoom and talk about the ins and outs of different projects and different initiatives. And there's many of them, actually. You know, this is just the ones that I've been involved in. There's a great program through the Smithsonian, funded by the Mellon Foundation, a fabulous program through UCLA, led by Ellen Pearlstein, with Indigenous audiences particularly, but not entirely, funded by the Mellon Foundation. So there's lots of examples. And I think Bard College, you know, I could go on and on. I think that we can learn from that. It would be really powerful to bring people together and just share what they've learned, what's worked and what hasn't. Where has the funding come from? How do we define success? And no, does that answer the question?
I think it does. And I think there's definitely a lot of interest to know more about that area going forwards. And I'm sure Lisa will probably pop in the chat as well. But I know that it's, yeah, definitely.
There is nothing more important. But I do strongly believe that, you know, as like in our department, as we articulate what our goals are. If you articulate your goals, you've got to find funding for it. You cannot say you believe in this and then say, oh, but there's no funding. Mm-hmm. And I hope that many will, you know, just don't ever just resign yourself to there's no funding. No, there is funding, there is support. There's different ways of doing that, and just believe in those projects and their importance and their relevance.
Absolutely. So the next question that's coming is from Peter Shaw, and it sort of relates back to what Detlev was talking about before in his question. And what he said here is, at what point is the original photographic image / object, at what point does it become redundant? It seems that the images that we value most are on prints.
Oh my gosh, well, he's probably asking, he needs to ask. This is where I wish I had an audience, because I would ask other people to answer this. I don't think it's ever redundant, the original photographic object and the negative as well. We continue to learn so much from those original objects. And so in my mind, they're never redundant. Now, the challenge, of course, is how do you preserve all these materials? We do have to prioritize. And you do have to, this is where preventive conservation becomes so important, because the enormity of these collections, their size, their diversity, their challenges, their vulnerability. But I don't think they're ever redundant. I just think we have to be strategic in the way that we preserve them, and the way that, again, that to me, that's the advocacy part of demonstrating why they're important and why we care.
So I have a couple of questions that have come in from Ruby, and I think they can be grouped together really well. So firstly, she was wondering, as a photograph conservator, what materials and tools you would recommend, especially for someone who's maybe a student or starting out doing photograph conservation, and what you would sort of say that you always find yourself reaching for when you go to conserve photographs. She was also wondering how many Paul McCartney concerts you've been to, and I think a lot of people would like that question answered, so I thought I'd just chuck up.
Okay, I'll save that one. Tools, well, gosh, truth be told, I don't do as much conservation treatment now except through my students. But there's so many tools that are just, the microscope is really, when I started a private practice, that was the first thing I bought, just because of the need for challenges like consolidation of flaking emulsions, which is very common with photographs, particularly around the outer edges, particularly when they're in dry environments. And are there tools that are different from conservation? Probably not. In terms of surface cleaning, we use a lot of cosmetic sponges, a lot of sometimes erasers. Again, this is a whole nother lecture when you can use different things, different processes, different challenges. Teflon spatulas is something that was sort of introduced to photography by David Collodi a long, long time ago, and now used by all of us, and become can be very useful. Although I have to say that it's rare to unmount a photograph. You typically wouldn't do it from a historic mount in ways that I might have been trained to do it, in 1980, in the late 1970s. But Teflon spatulas are still very useful. But ultimately, the tools are very similar. But the most important thing is understanding the differences and recognizing it is vital in conservation treatment that you can distinguish these different binder layers. Ultimately, it's the binder layer that's going to drive what can and can't be done. So salted paper prints and platinum prints, there is no binder. That those challenges are different. Those photographs can be treated differently. But you need to know for sure, is it gelatin, is it albumin, is it collodion? So you can begin to develop a protocol for conservation treatment. Perhaps the most important tool is your experience, because the other tools are readily available, and we use all of them in different ways. The Paul McCartney question is a good one. Let me tell you, I've seen him 21 times. So it's not, that's not, some of you might think it's a lot. It's really not. And I am so anxious for him to go back on tour. And I've told my husband that I don't care where he is in the world, I'm going to be there. So I don't know when these concerts will start up, but it can't be soon enough for me. But I will say, going to see the Beatles with my dad was something that was really quite amazing. And there's a whole story there, but I won't go into it. But the bottom line is that I didn't mean to, but I whacked my father in the nose with binoculars, and he ended up bleeding, had to be taken away by the police, and almost took me out of the concert. But thank God he did not. So yeah, no, I don't know. I just never grew out of it. I just love those Beatles.
My dad's a huge Paul McCartney fan as well, so I'm sure he'll be very envious to hear that you've been 21 times to see him. We've got another question that's come in from Detlev. He says, does the Delaware program also teach digitizing cultural heritage collections? If not, can you recommend any good courses or programs on this topic?
Detlev, we don't really teach that. And I'd have to think, honestly, it is so important, but I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. I have to do some research. There's some great programs in Germany, but that's not what you're asking. I mean, our students are involved in digitizing as it relates to their portfolios, their conservation portfolios, and using digital cameras for documentation and all of that we're all doing. But in terms of digitizing collections for preservation, no, we aren't involved in teaching that. Now, some of our students who want to develop some skills in that area might do their third-year internship at a regional center. Many of our regional centers in the United States now do have digital labs. Many very, very accomplished, or in an archive where there's a whole digital center and individuals that are expert in that. I think it's probably the library schools the information schools now, schools of information science, where you can gather those skills. Ryerson is one, but that's in Canada.
So another question that's come in from Cheryl is that it seems that tertiary education in conservation in Australia is moving away from specialised training and more into generalised knowledge. Is it an argument you have to make to your institution to retain the specialised training subjects?
No, we're fortunate. So our master's program is jointly sponsored between these two institutions, Winterthur and the University of Delaware, with a degree awarded by the University of Delaware. We take only 10 students a year. It's a 3-year program. And the University of Delaware sees it as a real outstanding program in many ways. And I think the fact that our students are being placed in postgraduate fellowships. Now, we all know in our field that you typically don't go right into a job, and it's a postgraduate fellowship. So we're able to place our students. So they're not they're not really so focused on those kinds of details. But I will say that in the last 3 years, I guess, under the leadership of Dr. Joelle Witkins, who I showed earlier on, who teaches preventive conservation, we now offer a major in preventive conservation. And that it is something that many students are interested in, if not majoring in preventive conservation and minoring. I, for one, would be a huge advocate for someone majoring in photograph conservation to minor in preventive conservation. And so this need for more general knowledge, particularly, when you're working with these large and diverse collections, is clear and compelling. And we do have opportunities now for students who really want to pursue that, get involved in data management, rethink environmental protocols, reimagine IPM, all kinds of things. And those students are doing great things and finding jobs too. That was a question in the United States. It wasn't a question I ever had, having worked in different parts of the world where I think preventive conservation, there are many preventive conservation conservators, but there was some concern about would there be jobs for individuals who are majoring in preventive conservation. I think indeed there are so many opportunities. So we're broadening, but we're not being asked in any way to change what we're doing as well. So we have all different disciplines. We've just added preventive conservation into the mix, part of the first year, and then the opportunity to major and minor in the second and third year as well. Many of our students also, and this is interesting, are pursuing preventive conservation summer internships. I think we all recognize how vital it is. But we don't have, and maybe that also comes down to advocacy. I think I'll just share my thoughts. So I have the great honor to serve on the board of trustees for the University of Delaware, which, to me, I love the school and just can't imagine that I've been asked to do that. But so as a trustee at the university, I would just say that, this advocacy is so important. You have to, in your department, sort of demonstrate it's not just about your department. It's what are you doing to help the entire university? So as a chair of art conservation, I can't be focused only on art conservation. I've got to be focused on the University of Delaware. What is this department doing to help all of my colleagues in the arts, humanities, sciences, social sciences, engineering, business? How do we collaborate so that the strength that we believe we bring to an institution is recognized through research, through community engagement, through global engagement? They've been so supportive of all these projects in different parts of the world, but we've tried to connect units outside of art conservation too. And for that reason, we've never been, asked about, why this or that. We've just been able to sort of do what we're doing. And, you know, I think also, you know, constantly being out there trying to fundraise, not expecting other people to do it for you. This is part of your responsibility, right? And so you have an idea, you try and find the funding. You go to the provost or the dean and say, we've got this idea, but we can come up with 50%. Can you help with the other 50%? So those kinds of approaches. But I also recognize every university, every school is different. All under higher ed has so many pressures now. So many things are changing. The way we teach will totally change. In conservation, there's no doubt that we'll continue to teach many things online in ways that we can do in such powerful ways. When I taught the photo block in January, even though it was terrifying to think, teaching, I had every device known to mankind for trying to project an image on a screen. Everything. I bought just about everything there is. Every time I tried to use it, something would go wrong. But the greatest thing is I could bring in speakers from all over the world for an hour at a time. And that was really wonderful. Those things will never change. We'll never go back. And so anyway, whoever, I probably went off the rails on that question, but.
Oh, it was great. So we're just going to go with 2 more questions, and then we'll provide a transcript of all the question and answers on the AICCM website after the webinar is over as well. So Debbie, the next question that came in, it actually relates a lot to the changes you were just talking about there. It's from Hasibullah Siddiqui, and he's just asked what for you has been the most change in photographic conservation?
In the recently, like within the last?
He hasn't specified, so I think answer it however you feel.
Whatever I want. Well, I think the greatest change is the number of people involved in this field. It's just so exciting to see. You know, there was a time where there were very few jobs, very few opportunities, and now we don't have enough photograph conservators for the opportunities that do exist. So I think that the greatest change is this increasing awareness about the value and power of these materials and why they're important to society, the meaning, their value for research, their value for outreach, their ability. I'm biased, I know, but I have seen time and time again how the preservation of photographic collections can connect communities in such powerful ways. And is that a change? It's more of a trend, but we see more and more of that, increasing investments in research and scholarship by foundations, by federal agencies, by governments. And so that is, you know, just building. I think there's still an increased momentum in that way, but it's recognizing the value. When I graduated in 1980, there really weren't any jobs in photograph conservation. I was very fortunate to be hired by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. And now there's so many opportunities. Of course, 1980 was a long time ago. I hate to admit.
Well, thank you, Deb. I think we're getting close to nearly an hour and a half now, so we're going to wrap this up. But the very last question is a cheeky one that Detlev Luth has sent in, which is, have you ever had a dinner date with anyone from the Beatles, Paul McCartney particularly?
Oh God, that's my dream. No, Detlev knows it's my dream. Oh my gosh, you know, I have tried to reach out though, in trying to be, you know, very serious and very professional, particularly, you know, Linda McCartney's work. She worked in all kinds of her collections down at the V&A. In the Center for Creative Photography. But no, but I would love to have that opportunity just to share what his music, you know, as he knows, has meant to the world really. And how, one thing I have also learned, photography connects the world. I believe in so many ways the Beatles do. I couldn't do it here because I didn't trust the technology, but sometimes I'll end with images and songs. And you can play those songs in Russia, you can play them in Benin, you can play them in South Africa, you can play them in New Zealand, and people connect to them. So maybe someday, I don't know, it would be a dream come true.
Well, Debra, thank you so much on behalf of the AICCM for, you know, giving such a wonderful talk today. We've had great response. We have a number of questions that we won't be able to get around to asking you in this webinar, but we will send those questions on to you and you'll be able to communicate with independently. But we are so grateful to have you share your knowledge here in Australia with an Australian audience, and actually many people from around the world. We've had an interesting group of participants today spanning the world. So thank you so much. And we encourage attendees to keep in connection with the AICCM, keep abreast of events that the AICCM are running. We look forward to many more interesting sessions like this. And maybe, Deb, there is another talk to be had on advocacy and breaking down barriers in the profession and allowing access for a more diverse range of conservators in the future. So thank you for raising all those really important points. And we're really grateful that you took this time on a windy and wet evening in New York. And we're really grateful for your expertise, and hopefully we can continue a collaboration into the future with Australian audiences.
Well, I know we sign off, but I just want to thank everyone for joining in. What an honor. And thank you all for just being so beautifully organized and so kind and trying to sort this out. And we were trying to do it in February, but we had those grandchildren coming. And anyway, I'm really grateful for everyone who joined on, and I'm happy to answer questions by email or connect with people by Zoom. So just send me a note.
Thank you, Debbie. And also thanks to my fellow conveners, Lisa Manfield, Jen Todd, and Caitlin Knight, who have helped facilitate this event today. And to everyone who attended, thank you very much, and we look forward to you at future AICCM events. And Deb, you can go and have a nice glass of wine now and listen to some Beatles and enjoy your weekend.
I'll probably have coffee.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Deborah.
you. Bye.